Hi, I'm Michael. Welcome to a course about learning information architecture, and this is part two of talking about verbs. The last, or the introductory part of verbs, was kind of more about the mechanics of how HTML works and how words are fueling things through hyperlinks to go places, and just the mechanics behind it all is something that is very near and dear to the information architect because people are using representations and words in order to explore and find the things that they want. In our example, the things that they want is in a table, and that table is filled with facts and figures and can maybe even be infinite amounts of information. Not infinite, but lots of information, way too much for one person to be able to organize. And that's where I'm going to introduce this idea of a sitemap. But first, let me just show you quickly this, what could almost be considered a sitemap, and I'll give you a very brief explanation that I was doing some work with CAD, a computer-aided drawing. And I started out just getting some orientation work. So when I first created this folder, I'm like, okay, CAD work's going to go here. And these are just things that get me started at the very foundational level. But then I started creating a project, this Lightbox. Well, the thing is I later learned that you need different files for different machines to do different things. So having them all under one project is absolutely a good way to organize. However, I changed my mind later. I also needed a lot of supplies, so I created a folder to put links about supplies. Then I found a library, and this is a place I put that library, which is another helper. And if you actually looked at the structure of HTML pages, they all have usually default folders that actually handle a lot of this kind of stuff. If you look at your library, for example, in the Mac OS, that's a word that they use called library, where they keep helpful pieces of code that help different things do things. So in any case, the words are what we're getting at. And the idea there in folders, such as now I learned in this particular file format is for 3D printers. This other format is for a laser printer and sketches or something else. So this is what most people would do, I would imagine. And for me, it's fine. I'm just a person and I remember doing this, so I know where things are organized. But organizing it by these concepts is powerful, right? So what do you want to do, I think, is the most powerful way to organize your information. So on that note, let's take a look at this concept of a sitemap. Here is a typical sitemap. What I would say typically may or may not be particularly useful, yet I would say for one, it says, okay, there's this area in our site called products, and those products have categories. Some are featured, some are collections. There are then another page, so this could represent a page. So there's a category page, a feature page, and that is okay. That's fine to use this to represent pages, and this to more represent something more like navigation, what goes at the top of the page, rather than it being a page in itself. Compare products, another page. So this is mapping out in actually a pretty decent way. Hey, this might be the sitemap you would have for your database. It might start with something to do with categorization and have some different options there. And these words are the way people will get around because these are very noun-like words, which is what I'd like to show some different options actually. Now, if you are, and in this case, cart, account, other pages, start to make me think that these are separate kinds of activities. If these are products, buying product is a different concept than looking at products. Makes sense. So then there's some stuff around cart. If you buy things from a place, you might need to give your identity. You should give your identity to fulfill your orders. So there's a whole area called an account. And it has ideas here as well that will have to either become pages or become navigation. So this could also be sub-navigation within a category. So there usually is a home to these, and that might be the first one, might not. So there's just a differentiation as you use things like a box. I'm going to show you a different example. And then lastly, I don't know, they threw in another page. So very typical and somewhat useful to start to have discussions about these words and about the way you will separate out the experience into different bite-sized chunks. Absolutely perfect. That is what a sitemap is meant to do. However, it can do more things, but we'll pause here and say to accomplish this is a fantastic first start to just figure out from your database what are the possible ways that people might want to explore it. And you can do that in, like in this case, sort of as generically as this does. It could be about anything that is a product. This could be Amazon, but it probably isn't. So I'd like to tour a few sitemaps and give you the quickest overview. And here's a good one where we talk about a database structure, and I'm going to show you an example of kind of how to manage that, once again, nouns of the database structure. So in this case, you're seeing it, that the navigation in the sitemap is that you're going to go to a page, or in this representation, that you look for age, color, size, location, gender, breed of a dog. This is, I think, a dog adoption. And then here's some examples of the data that is in the table for color, for size, location, gender, by breed. This is fantastic. This is great. So this is a great discussion just to see what the high level information that you might need in order to get people to where they need to be in sorting through all the data that you have. However, I like to see actually a lot more representation of how do you engage users in your information in a sitemap. What are the words and what are the concepts that might appeal to them? So while you might have areas where it's very factual and I want X, being able to go by mood is a much more powerful way to organize your content. It might be exactly the same content, however, you're going to do it contextually to bring about some other kind of experience for your users. These are the ones I really like, so I can show you some in real life. So here's a bit of a hybrid. We're kind of taking one step where it really talks about the kind of property that it is, and it gathers them into some areas that you may or may not know or may not be able to find on your own, such as positions, views. I think there's a treehouse, tiny homes. These are just ways to help people explore the different offerings on Airbnb, but not necessarily by a one-to-one relationship. This is not a website, but the concept was so appealing to me that I got this book, and the book was organizing movies that you could watch about how they made you feel. And in this case, these are just some of the words that they used. For an actual navigation, they'd have to be a little bit shorter, but the concept hopefully makes sense that you're really organizing verbs around more how do you want the customer to engage with you. For example, if you look at a site, one of the biggest difficulties with a regular sitemap is it tends to, and you can see it almost right here, it's about us, it's about our values, it's about how we do things. I have found in my experience that you actually want to shift that. Most people are at your site to be catered to. They want it to be about them rather than about you, if that makes sense. So in this case, some of the shifting from nouns to verbs, nouns very factual, verbs more aspirational, how am I going to engage with your content? So the words don't have to be necessarily one-to-one relationship always with the content on the page. It can be more about what is the customer goal. This particular example has navigation that I particularly like. I like almost everything about this. There is something up here, and it is very much at the top. You might not even notice it, but it is a segmentation strategy that the things that we offer to individuals may be different from what we would offer to universities or for governments. Very clever, maybe easy to miss, but at the same point, it does show that navigation does not have to be the same for every persona. And we haven't spoken about personas, but it is a good thing to start to think through when you are creating your navigation is, do you need to find that ability to segment it out for different kinds of people and have different words for different kinds of people? It's a complex subject, but this is where the fun is. Information architects are going to live in this space for a fair amount of time. We actually will move on and add more value, but this is an area where if you're doing this day to day, you might be doing this for many, many sites. And this is where you shine in terms of how do people get around. I do like any other words. Find your new career is a great call to action. And join for free is another great call to action. So either they have extensively tested their wording or they have a really good information architect, because all of these are really clear and they also get rid of some of the puzzling concepts that may come from very terse and small words. They're also fairly clean and clear in terms of not having a lot going on, which is also very helpful. You don't want to have a lot of options when you first start out in a page. It becomes very overwhelming. I think this "what do you want" is also a fantastic way to get somebody to, instead of saying the word search, they also are giving you examples. Also terrific. And then lastly, this explore, where you're seeing more of the header and a what's called a mega menu. This is a way that allows people to browse without really moving and having to deal with orientation too much. You're able to see a lot of options just because you're taking over the whole page. And I guess subjects, data science is really big now. This is not alphabetized, so data science has now overwhelmed the world of business. So it goes. But yes, they're sorting this by popularity, perhaps methodologic, hopefully not being all last. But these are just a way to get people engaged and to start to understand what value you bring. And then I think lastly, they've got another little call to action here, but very minimal, very straight and to the point, and very verb-oriented, action-oriented navigation. Excellent job. In the particular style, this is another mega menu. You can see this concept also up above of moving into different areas. These are different things that they offer that are other than looking for great gear and clothing. But as you get into verbs, I want to cycle, I want to climb. It's a perfect job for this set of concepts, because you can change this around at will. You don't have to change your major navigation unless you introduce some new activity that people want to do. Oh, there you go. I was thinking boating, but water is under boating. So this is also a great example. How do you make this vague enough to cover maybe different things? Swimsuits, kayaks, paddle boards. Super cool. So the thoughtfulness behind this is 100% where you put this in a sitemap and you begin to have discussions about how do you organize the content under these different concepts. So I can look at this in different pages, and what you'll start to see most prominently is either a hamburger menu, which is here, which normally is a way to open and to be able to explore these different ideas. This is much, much more hierarchical, as you can see. You just can't fit everything on a page. But the words are the same as in the other page. You're just displaying them in a different way. And it's always nice to know, as you know, if you get into smaller or different kinds of setups, how much can you fit on a page? It is critical as you are coming up with words that you can just make sure that they are short enough. That's why compound words, when there's more than one word or three words, it can get very, very tricky. You almost always want to make it a bit smaller. Important thing, as we just saw, the idea of using a post-it note with words in it or some other representation of words to have discussions and to get buy-in on your ideas around how to organize the content is the goal of a sitemap. But you're going to want to quickly move on from there, because as you see, sitemaps are a little bit difficult to critique. It's hard to know, are these enough words or too few words? So what happens normally quickly is that you move to some more low fidelity ways of representing a page. That might, for example, be, I do like this example of using these page icons, just because they give a little bit of a feel for what might be on that page without getting into too much detail. So when you say, hey, this page is about X or represents Y, these can be chosen in order to give a little bit more detail, but not too much, because you're not in the design phase yet. This example is interesting only because it's mixing a couple of things, mixing almost a low fidelity wireframe style, which I like quite a bit at this level to kind of say, well, there's a page, but the page has a lot of things going on, but I want to make sure that it has these elements, the header, this element, who we are. These words here are part of the information architecture, the verbs, the sitemap, but it doesn't have to be page oriented. Now, the question would be, are these previews? We'll take a look here. So right now there's an About Us page, which also contains the same sort of words and sections. This works well. I am also getting an idea this might represent a mobile viewport, but maybe not. But either way, that's fine. Just in a way, because this is much too small to seemingly read on a mobile viewport, but I'm not going to be picky. It just is about the words. So recent projects is under our experience, makes sense. Project page is also available through, let's see, now how did you get to our experience? So navigation, our experience. Did I click on a project? I see. So project led me to the project page, perhaps, but that's why sometimes the fidelity here can be a little misleading. The color coding could also be slightly misleading, especially since you've got a service area that looks like bullets. Let's just say that this particular level of fidelity seems like a great way to have a conversation. It certainly looks good. I think it might be difficult to get feedback only because people would say they should really talk about the words. Let's get it to that point. I'm really interested in what words are you using. And if you looked at this, it just says we are going to, for our company, it looks like a design agency, for example, that about us, our services, our experience, blog, and contact us are the areas that we're going to have for someone to explore. I've seen some examples here where you do want to get to a prototype. You do want to show how the words actually work. That is absolutely going to get you the most reasonable feedback because people will just explore and use your words to get around the content, and you want to show examples. So this sort of fidelity of prototype is great, but it is sometimes does take time. And if you do go and change things, which is the goal, you want to change things based on the feedback that you get, changing those big picture words can sometimes be repetitive if you're not using libraries that are tied together through symbolic relationships, such as having a symbolic header is great. If you ever change the header, all the headers that are using that change. And this gets us into design systems and some of the tools needed to make your life easier and manage the change. But certainly getting to a higher fidelity is your goal. So you'll start with a sitemap. You'll want to use that in order to make sure the wording and the organizational concepts are clear. Then you want to get into something maybe with a little more fidelity just to get that gut feeling. Do you have the right amount of space? Are you going to need to make some sort of changes based on screen size? And then lastly, use that in order to build out a real prototype of somebody using your navigation to find something. That's where everything will come together. I've seen also the concepts of being a little bit more of a flow diagram. So we call all this next step flow because you're going to use things and you're going to show flowing in between and out of these states in order to get, again, more feedback from real customers or real people to see how well these things fit. What are the priorities? Are they put in the right order? All sorts of things that we just demonstrated by looking at some good examples. But you might want to resist a little bit more of these flow concepts or diagrams. I'd say only for the reason that people might find them a little bit hard to read and hard to give feedback on. They tend to look good enough, but until you see them in real life, it is hard to say that this is good and or bad. So that's verbs. And the next step we're going to take is into the world of knowledge. And that is great. How do you now really, and speaking of feedback, someone actually using your interface is going to be the next step in knowledge, because that's where we're going to start into metadata. So hopefully that got everything you need to get your first steps in organizing your content.